Your F-35 fighter jet needs rare earth magnets to fly. Your Navy's guided missiles need rare earth elements to hit their targets. Your submarines, your satellites, your radar systems, your precision-guided bombs, all of them need materials that come from one place. Not America, not an ally, not a friendly nation, China. Right now, the United States military's ability to build and replenish its most advanced weapons is directly dependent on a country that has already started weaponizing that dependency. And recently, the President of the United States flew to Beijing, not to confront China about it, but to ask them, very politely, to please keep the supply flowing. The most powerful military in the world cannot fully rearm without China's permission. That is not a theory. That is the documented reality of the decade. First, what exactly are rare earth elements? The name is misleading. They are not particularly rare in the ground. There are 17 of them on the periodic table, with names like neodymium, dysprosium, samarium, terbium. You have never heard of most of them. You use all of them every day. The magnet in your phone's speakers? Rare earths. The motor in your electric vehicle? Rare earths. The vibration mechanism that makes your phone buzz? Rare earths. The night vision goggles used by United States Special Forces? Rare earths. The targeting system on an F-35 Lightning II? Rare earths. The guidance systems in Tomahawk cruise missiles? Rare earths. Here is the problem. While rare earth elements exist in the ground across the planet, in Australia, Brazil, Africa, and the United States itself, the processing and refining of those raw materials into usable form requires an extraordinarily complex, capital-intensive, and chemically demanding industrial process. And over the course of 4 decades, one country built and perfected that process at a scale no one else could match. China controls 60% of global rare earth mining and over 90% of global rare earth refining and processing. It produces approximately 90% of the world's high-performance rare earth permanent magnets. Even minerals that are mined outside China, in Australia, in Canada, in the United States, are largely shipped to China for processing, because no one else has built the refining infrastructure. The Mountain Pass rare earth mine in California, America's largest, was reopening its facilities after years of closure. As recently as 2019, it was still shipping 98% of its raw material to China for processing, because the United States simply did not have the domestic capability to refine what it was digging out of its own ground. This dependency did not happen overnight, and it did not happen by accident. At least, not on China's side. In the 1980s, China's paramount leader Deng Xiaoping made a statement that has since become famous in strategic circles. He said the Middle East has oil and China has rare earths. At the time, it sounded like a boast. It was a roadmap. Over the following 4 decades, China subsidized its rare earth industry heavily, undercut global prices, and systematically drove competitors out of the market. American and European rare earth operations shut down, not because the minerals ran out, but because Chinese subsidized production made it economically impossible to compete. The processing expertise migrated to China. The refining infrastructure was built in China. The supply chains ran through China. The United States was not entirely blind to this. In 2010, China briefly restricted rare earth exports to Japan during a territorial dispute, and the world got a short, alarming preview of what dependency looked like in practice. Prices spiked, supply chains stuttered, Japan and the United States scrambled to find alternatives, and then China eased the restrictions. The alarm bells faded, the dependency deepened. What followed was 2 decades of strategic complacency. American corporations preferred cheap Chinese processed materials over the expensive, time-consuming process of rebuilding domestic capacity. The defense industry accepted the dependency as a cost of doing business. And Washington, across multiple administrations, failed to treat the vulnerability with the urgency it deserved. By the time anyone in Washington was truly alarmed, China controlled the choke point. For decades, China's rare earth dominance was a latent threat, a card held in reserve. In 2025, Beijing played it. On April 4, 2025, the same day the Trump administration announced sweeping Liberation Day tariffs on Chinese goods, China responded. Not with tariffs of its own, with something far more precise. Beijing introduced a licensing system requiring case-by-case government approval for the export of 7 specific rare earth elements and permanent magnet materials. The target was unmistakable. These were the first Chinese export restrictions specifically targeting the defense sector. Foreign militaries and companies producing military-use goods would be denied export licenses. The affected materials are used in F-35 jets, Virginia-class submarines, Predator drones, Tomahawk missiles, radar systems, and precision-guided munitions. Western defense contractors reported significant production delays and sharp price spikes. The supply chain was being throttled, deliberately, selectively, surgically. Then, in October 2025, Beijing escalated further, announcing controls on virtually all products containing more than 0.1% rare earths, along with the processing equipment needed to work with them. The intent was clear. Even if you tried to build processing capacity outside China, China would restrict the equipment you needed to do it. Washington and Beijing eventually reached a partial stand-down at the APEC summit in Busan in late October 2025. China agreed to pause some of the October measures for 1 year, but Beijing kept the April licensing system fully intact. The case-by-case approval requirement for military-use rare earth exports remained in force. China had demonstrated the weapon worked, established the legal architecture to use it again at any time, and retained the ability to tighten or loosen it as diplomatic conditions required. China did not give up the weapon. It just lowered it slightly. It can raise it again tomorrow. In January 2026, Beijing quietly expanded the export control catalog again, adding rare earth compounds, silver, and additional materials. And in early 2026, China redirected elements of the same framework toward Japan, prohibiting exports to Japanese military users and tightening scrutiny of transfers through third countries. The message to the entire Western defense community was unmistakable. This instrument can be pointed at anyone, at any time. A single Virginia-class attack submarine, one of the Navy's most critical platforms, contains approximately 9,200 pounds of rare earth materials, every one of them processed in China. Building one F-35 fighter jet requires more than 900 pounds of rare earth materials. America produces over 150 F-35s per year. At current dependency rates, every single one of those jets requires Chinese-processed rare earths to be completed. Neodymium iron-boron magnets, made almost exclusively in China, are critical to the F-35's flight control systems. Gallium arsenide chips, heavily sourced from China, power the electronic warfare systems that allow American jets to jam enemy radar. Antimony, which China has also restricted, is used in ammunition and artillery shells. The United States spent hundreds of billions of dollars fighting a war in the Middle East in 2025 and 2026. Those weapons have been used. They need to be replaced. And replacing them, rebuilding missile stockpiles, replenishing munitions, restoring naval capacity, requires rare earth materials that currently flow through Chinese-controlled supply chains. This is why the president flew to Beijing, not from strength, from necessity. The honest answer is yes, but not quickly and not cheaply. The Trump administration has taken some meaningful steps. The Pentagon struck a deal with MP Materials, America's largest rare earth miner, that included a government equity stake, guaranteed price floors and a commitment to buy American-processed rare earths for defense applications. United States rare earth mining stocks surged. Investment began moving. But there is an enormous gap between beginning and finishing. Detailed analysis published in 2025 estimated that replacing China's copper smelting and refining capacity alone would require approximately $85 billion of investment. Building out the full critical mineral processing infrastructure the United States needs could take hundreds of billions of dollars and, here is the brutal reality, 10 to 20 years, because new processing plants and smelters take that long to design, permit, build, and bring online. Australia, Canada, and other allied nations have significant rare earth reserves, but most of their raw material still goes to China for processing, because the allied world has not yet built refining infrastructure at scale. Even with accelerated investment, America and its partners face years, if not decades, of continued structural dependence. China, meanwhile, is not standing still. Beijing is investing in further technological consolidation, tightening its control over processing know-how and expanding its legal architecture to restrict not just the minerals, but the equipment and expertise needed to replicate Chinese processing capabilities anywhere else. Here is the strategic picture in plain language. China spent 40 years quietly building a chokehold over the materials that modern military power depends on. It did it through subsidies, through patience, and through a long-term industrial strategy that Western democracies, focused on quarterly returns and electoral cycles, were never willing to match. Now, at the moment of maximum geopolitical tension, with weapons stockpiles depleted, with China watching from across the Taiwan Strait, Beijing holds a lever that it has already demonstrated it is willing to pull. America is not defenseless, it is not losing, but it is caught in a trap that will take a generation to fully escape, if the political will to escape it holds, which history suggests is not guaranteed. The rare earth problem is not a trade dispute. It is not a tariff negotiation. It is a fundamental question about whether the United States allowed a strategic adversary to embed itself into the supply chains of American military power. The answer, documented, verified, and sitting in plain sight, is yes. The magnet in your